Have you ever picked up a bag of coffee at a cafe or grocery store and noticed it says something like single origin Ethiopia or sourced from Colombia on the label? Maybe you thought it sounded fancy, or maybe you just grabbed it and moved on. But here's the thing, that little detail about where your coffee comes from, it actually tells you a whole lot more than you might think. Today we're going to break down what country of origin really means in the world of coffee, why roasters and baristas talk about it so much, and whether it actually makes a difference in your cup. Let's start with the basics. Country of origin simply refers to where the coffee beans were grown. Coffee is an agricultural product, just like wine grapes or olive oil, and the place it grows has a massive impact on how it ends up tasting. The term gets used a lot in specialty coffee circles, but it's really just a way of saying, this coffee came from this specific part of the world. And when we're talking about coffee, the world is a pretty big and diverse place. Coffee is grown in what's called the bean belt, a band of tropical and subtropical regions that circles the globe between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. We're talking about countries in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and even parts of the Pacific Islands. Now, why does location matter so much? It all comes down to something called terroir, a word borrowed from the wine world. Terroir refers to the combination of environmental factors that influence how a crop tastes. For coffee, this includes the altitude where the plants are grown, the soil composition, the amount of rainfall, the temperature, the humidity, and even the surrounding vegetation. All of these elements work together to shape the flavor compounds inside the coffee cherry, which eventually becomes your roasted bean. A coffee grown at high altitude in the mountains of Ethiopia is going to develop very differently than one grown on the lower slopes of a farm in Sumatra. Same plant, completely different cup. Let's walk through some of the major coffee-producing regions so you can start to get a feel for how this plays out in real life. Ethiopia is widely considered the birthplace of coffee, and beans from this country are known for their bright, complex, and often floral or fruity characteristics. You might taste notes of jasmine, blueberry, bergamot, or stone fruit in an Ethiopian coffee, especially one that's been processed naturally, meaning the fruit was left on the bean to dry. It's a cup that can feel almost tea-like in its delicacy, and it often surprises people who are used to heavier, darker roasts. Colombia is probably one of the most recognizable names in coffee, and for good reason. The country has a long history of coffee production and benefits from an ideal climate, high altitudes, rich volcanic soil, and 2 harvesting seasons per year thanks to its geography. Colombian coffees tend to be smooth, balanced, and approachable. You might pick up flavors like caramel, red apple, mild citrus, or even light chocolate. It's the kind of coffee that works beautifully across a range of brewing methods and doesn't demand a lot from the drinker, which is part of why it became so popular globally. Ethiopia and Colombia are just 2 examples. Kenya is famous for producing coffees with bold, wine-like acidity and dark berry notes. Guatemala tends to offer a fuller body with chocolate and toffee-like sweetness. Costa Rica produces beans that are clean and bright, often with notes of honey and citrus. Brazil, the world's largest coffee producer, is known for lower acidity, heavier body, and chocolatey, nutty flavors that make it a popular choice for espresso blends. And then you have places like Sumatra in Indonesia, where the processing method called wet hulling contributes to a distinctly earthy, bold, almost savory cup that has a devoted following among people who love a rich, low-acid coffee. So at this point you might be thinking, okay, this is interesting, but does it actually matter when I'm just trying to get my morning caffeine fix? That's a fair question. The honest answer is, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're someone who drinks coffee mostly for the energy and doesn't think much about flavor, then origin might not feel relevant to you. But if you've ever had a cup of coffee that genuinely surprised you, one that tasted like something other than just coffee, there's a good chance the origin played a big role in that experience. Here's what's really useful about knowing origin. It gives you a starting point for understanding your own preferences. If you try an Ethiopian coffee and love the bright, fruity notes, that tells you something about the flavor profiles you're drawn to. If you try a Sumatran and find yourself loving the earthy depth, that's equally valuable information. Country of origin becomes a kind of shorthand, not a guarantee but a reliable starting point for what you're likely to experience in the cup. It's also worth saying that country of origin is just one piece of the puzzle. Two coffees from the same country, or even the same region, can taste remarkably different depending on the farm, the variety of coffee plant, the processing method, and how the roaster has chosen to roast it. That's why you'll often see specialty bags get more specific, listing the region, the farm or cooperative, and sometimes even the processing method. Country of origin is the first layer. The more specific the information, the more precisely you can understand and predict the flavor. Processing method is one of the biggest variables after origin. Natural processing, where the coffee cherry is dried whole around the bean, tends to produce fruitier, wilder, more complex flavors. Washed processing, where the fruit is removed before drying, creates cleaner, brighter cups that let the bean's natural character come through more clearly. Honey processing falls somewhere in between. The same bean, processed differently, can taste like two entirely different coffees, which is part of what makes coffee so endlessly fascinating to explore. For the specialty coffee world, country of origin matters deeply because it's tied to something bigger than flavor. It's tied to traceability and transparency. When a roaster can tell you exactly where a coffee comes from, the country, the region, the farm, the farmer's name, it means there's a traceable supply chain. That traceability is what allows roasters to build direct relationships with producers, pay fair or above market prices, and support sustainable farming practices. So when you see single origin on a bag, you're not just getting a flavor story, you're often getting an ethical story too, one about where your money is going and who it's supporting. This is something worth thinking about as a consumer. Coffee is one of the most traded commodities in the world, and the people who grow it are often in some of the most economically vulnerable parts of that supply chain. When roasters prioritize sourcing from specific origins and invest in those relationships, it creates a ripple effect that can genuinely improve livelihoods for farmers and their communities. Buying single-origin coffee from a roaster who talks openly about their sourcing practices is one of the most direct ways a coffee drinker can support that system. So does country of origin really matter? Yes, and in more ways than one. It matters for flavor because the geography, climate, and terroir of a place leave a fingerprint on every bean that grows there. It matters for your personal taste journey because knowing origin helps you identify what you love and seek more of it. It matters for quality and traceability because specificity in sourcing usually reflects a roaster who cares deeply about the product they're putting out. And it matters ethically because every bag of coffee is connected to a place and the people who work that land. The next time you're choosing a bag of coffee, whether at a specialty shop, a farmer's market, or even just your local grocery store, take a second to look at where it's from. If there's information about the origin, even just the country, that's your invitation to start building a relationship with that cup before you've even brewed it. Think about the altitude, the climate, the hands that harvested it. Let that context shape how you experience it. Coffee is so much more than a caffeine delivery system. It's a product of the earth, shaped by place, and every origin has its own story to tell. And the best part? You get to taste it. And that's a wrap on today's video. If you learned something new about where your coffee comes from, go ahead and give this video a like. It really does help the channel more than you know. If you're new here, welcome. We talk about coffee in all its forms, from the beans to the brew to the cafes worth visiting. So hit that subscribe button and stick around. We'd love to have you as part of this community. Drop a comment below and tell me what's your favorite coffee origin.